The Russian-Polish animosity stretches back centuries. Is this business or personal? We in Poland may think it's the latter, but is that accurate or not accurate enough? So, was the Katyn Forest massacre just another case of business as usual? Join me, Jan Darasz, for How We Got Here.
One of the first major events that fueled Russia's hatred for Poland was the Union of Brest in 1596. Poland enacted the policy to bring parts of the Orthodox Church under papal authority. From then on, Muscovy-loyal clerics often framed Poles as corrupting agents of heresy. During the time of troubles in Russia that spanned between 1598 and 1613, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth sought to enthrone a likely impostor of Ivan the Terrible's son Dmitry. The man promised religious toleration and even hinted at union with the Catholic Church, which gained him backing not only in Poland, but ironically among disaffected Muscovy boyars, clergy and commoners. After the assassination of false Dmitry I in 1606 and the brief reign of Tsar Vasily Shuisky, Russia shattered into multiple factions. Polish king Sigmund III Vasa besieged and captured Smolensk in 1611, opening the way to Moscow. Polish forces occupied the city from 1610 until 1612. This became a foundational trauma in Russian historical memory, thought as an existential threat to the Russian state. Over a century later, Russia took its vengeance against Poland, partitioning the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth together with Prussia and Austria. While Poland was removed from world maps, its people preserved Polish culture and identity. In the wake of the 19th century November and January uprisings, Russia steps up its Russification efforts. But these ultimately proved inefficient, as Poland was reborn from the ashes of World War I on November 11, 1918, after 123 years of non-existence. Meanwhile, the Bolshevik Revolution drowned the Tsarist Russia in the royal blood of its last ruling dynasty, the Romanovs. But be it white or red Russia, old habits of rapacious suspicion and envy died hard. Driven by a darkly messianic idea of spreading communism to every corner of the earth, Lenin cast the Red Army westward, with freshly resurgent Poland taking on the role of bulwark for war-exhausted Europe. In August 1920, Poland yet again humiliated Russia, forcing the Red Army to rout following its defeat in the Battle of Warsaw, also known as the Miracle of the Vistula. Humiliation that would not be forgotten by Lenin's successor, Stalin.
I'm delighted to welcome a very honoured guest of the programme, as usual, Witold Rodkiewicz, the Senior Fellow at the Russian Department at the Centre for Eastern Studies. Welcome once more to the programme.
Thank you very much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Great to have you. In order to discuss Russo-Polish tensions, mutual animosity, mutual loathing of each other, if we can put it that way, you have to go back, as the clip showed, to the 16th century and beyond, don't you?
Yes, I think 16th century is probably a good place to start. This is when the relations acquired between Muscovite state and the Polish crown acquired a real dimension, became real in terms of political competition, political rivalry, political hostility. I mean, the essence of the problem was that at the time Poland was a dual state. In fact, there was no Poland as such. There was a Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which actually included significant chunks of what is East Slavic ethnic territory. The territories roughly of today's Ukraine and today's Belarus. But one has to remember that at that time, what counted was not the masses of the people, but the elites. And the elites of these Ruthenian territories were loyal subjects of the Polish crown and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. So, for example, when Muscovite forces attacked Smolensk in 1514, it was defended by everyone, including the local Orthodox bishop, who wanted to remain loyal to the Grand Duke of Lithuania. People at the time did not necessarily think in national terms; they thought in terms of
allegiance,
loyalty, allegiance to their feudal lord. So one of the fundamental problems that we have is that we very often project our basically 19th century understanding of how societies work, how political systems work, to the 16th century, and I think it's very often very misleading. But certain elements, though, there is of course certain continuity, and one of the fundamental and interesting pieces of the continuity on the Polish side is that already in the 16th century, in Polish political literature, Muscovy was contrasted with Poland. Poland was seen, Poland-Lithuania, Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, a republic, was seen as an entity imbued and based on the notions of personal liberty, whereas the Muscovite state was seen as a synonym of slavery and absolutist rule by an individual. So this contrast was defined in these strong ideological terms from the very beginning of this relationship, which did not mean that there was some kind of ethnic nationalist tension as we understand it since 19th century, because the Russian Czars were, for example, putting their candidature several times for election, because Polish monarchy was elected,
yes.
And they were quite popular in certain areas of actually, ethnic Poland, because this was part of the Renaissance ideology. There was always hope on the Polish side that the ideas that Polish elites represented, the ideas of liberty, are so powerful that if we can establish this relationship, when we can bring the Russian Tsar to Krakow, yes, or Warsaw, he would be influenced by the ideas of liberty, and we can convert our rivals to the creed that we represent.
And there's a very interesting historian, Karamazin. How did he formulate the Russian historian? How did he formulate the Russian perspective on Poland?
Nicholas Karamzin was one might say a father figure of Russian national thought, modern Russian national thought, and modern Russian political culture. And it's interesting that, in fact, in one of his memos to Tsar Alexander I, he formulated certain ideas about Poles and Poland and the Poles, which became really canonic for the entire 19th century.
Conventional wisdom.
19th century Russian policy. First of all, he depicted the conflict between Poland and Russia as an existential struggle. It was either or. He posited there can be no compromise. The restoration of Poland is going to be a fall of Russia, to quote him. And he also posited that as he said, the idea of a Polish-Russian compromise, for which his monarch Alexander I, for some time, tried to figure a kind of a compromise solution under, of course, the Russian monarchy, saying the Poles will never be our sincere brothers, and they will never be our loyal allies. The Russian sword that we conquered conquered Poland by the sword, and this is our right. So in other words, he posited this relationship, which is historically has been settled. This is a conflict between two pretenders for imperial role in this region.
Russia
it was settled, and the Poles should reconcile themselves with that, but they can never be again equal partners. They should accept to be, as he put it, Poles Russians. And I think this view, and in fact, if you look at Russian internal politics, all the way to the 1880s, I would say, if people talked, and Russian officials and Russian elite figures thought about fundamental problems with the Russian Empire, the main question was always the Polish question.
Yes,
because this was seen as a question, as the Polish question could undermine the power of the Russian Empire and really destroy it. Once the Russian economic development and demographic development, took off in the 1880s, and the clearly economic weight of Poland and the Polish population was diminished, this no longer this was kind of forgotten. By 1914, there were other problems that seemed more pressing, and this existential relationship, this existential conflict between Russian elites and Poland was to some extent forgotten. But then the problem is it would come up in certain key moments in history again, when Poland and Poles would begin to be seen by Muscovite, by Russian Soviet elite as an important stumbling block on the road to Russian glory and power, and Soviet glory and power in the Soviet times.
We've been commemorating the 85th anniversary of the Katyn Forest Massacre in 1940. So before we discuss more modern events arising from that, we'll have a look at our clip.
Soviet Foreign Commissar Vyacheslav Molotov and the Third Reich's Joachim von Ribbentrop. It is by their names that a pact of non-aggression signed by the Third Reich and the Soviet Union on August 23, 1939, came to be known in history. With it, the secret protocol under which Poland was to be attacked jointly and its territories shared by the attackers was signed. Poland didn't stand a chance fighting on both fronts. The Polish forces that did not fall in battle or retreat abroad were disarmed, loaded onto trains, and transported to Katyn, Tver, Kharkiv, and other locations, all under Soviet control at the time. There, throughout April and May of 1940, the NKVD Soviet secret police executed more than 21,000 Poles with point-blank shots on the direct orders of Joseph Stalin himself. Around 8,000 of the victims were Polish military officers, many of them not career soldiers, but doctors, lawyers, professors, engineers, and civil servants who had officer ranks because of Poland's system of universal military training. The Soviets specifically targeted individuals with leadership potential in Polish society, namely politicians, landowners, university professors, writers, journalists, teachers, priests, and other members of the intelligentsia. Their killing had a sole purpose: to decapitate Polish society. In April 1943, during the German occupation of Smolensk, Nazi forces uncovered mass graves in the Katyn Forest. An exhumation commenced, overseen by an international medical commission of 12 neutral or German-occupied countries. In 1993, as the first Russian leader in history, Boris Yeltsin publicly apologized to the Poles for the Katyn massacre during his visit to Poland. In March 2007, the Polish embassy in Moscow screened Andrzej Wajda's movie Katyn. And yet, despite promises to declassify more Katyn-related documents, future Russian leadership would not live up to the promise. The killing of Poland's finest would continue being commemorated with motorbike rides and Polish-Russian tribute ceremonies. And yet, the Poles killed in Katyn are but a drop in the ocean of Polish blood spilled by the NKVD. It is estimated that between 320,000 and 1 million Poles were deported to Siberia, Kazakhstan, Ural Mountains, Soviet Far East and elsewhere, with mortality ranging from 3 to 10%. Most of the Poles died due to malnutrition, overwork and disease. The exact numbers of the victims remain unknown.
As far as the massacre itself is concerned, was this a continuation of what you said previously, that this was a class and a national enemy? There was no room for manoeuvre, so they had to be got rid of. Was that the motivation that made them execute these 20,000 officers? Just a kind of a cold calculation.
Yes, but very much so. They were seen as the elite of the Polish nation. It was clearly the objective of the Soviet policy, if not in the short term, then in the middle term, to put Polish territories under some form of Soviet control. I think in 1940 Stalin couldn't have known what kind of control, whether it would be direct, because there were ideas about Poland becoming one of the so-called Soviet republics. This was not. Yes. This was clearly one potential scenario, or to be a state that would be formally independent as the so-called Polish People's Republic established after the Second World War, during the Second World War, formally after the Second World War was the case. But in both cases, those people who were seen as willing to resist actively Soviet policies and Soviet designs were seen as enemies and were liquidated as a part of a political process. One has to look at this in the context of the radicalization of the Soviet policies during the 1930s and massive purges and massive murders that took place, especially in the 1937-38. And in this context, one should mention that a significant part of the victims in these 2 years were 1,600,000 people were shot by the same way that people were shot in Katyn. And this is when and where the methodology of this type of murder was worked out. A significant and overrepresentative part of this was actually people who were ethnically Polish, who were Soviet citizens of Polish nationality, because there was so-called the Polish action of the NKVD in the 1937, where people were arrested who were, most of them actually of Polish ethnic origin, but who were accused and suspected of being in some kind of connection with the Polish state, with the Polish intelligence, and taking into account that the Polish minority in the Soviet Union counted probably about 500,000 people officially. If you take 100,000 men who were shot, and this is that cohort, Polish cohort, had almost the highest percentage of people who were sentenced to death and not to prison camps. It means that practically almost every male Pole within this group was liquidated. This was in the context when the Soviet ideology, about which I was talking earlier, underwent a very significant evolution in which class categories were actually merged with national ethnic categories, and some national groups, ethnic groups, were being seen and defined as enemies of the Soviet power per se.
Yeah.
In other words, not because they belonged to the higher classes, but because they were members of specific ethnic groups. And Poles are actually the most important among those groups. There were some others, but Poles were actually the largest and the most important. So there was this coalescence of these different motivations, and in fact, this was part of a special type of communist social engineering. Because one has to remember that these people were interviewed in the internment camps in which they are held. Several hundred of them were selected as being possible collaborators in these new Soviet projects of Soviet Poland, but almost 20,000 were deemed completely unwilling to be part of that, and that's why they had to be liquidated. So not everyone was liquidated. A small percentage, about a few hundred officers, who after these they were all subject to very long and extensive interviews, by which the Soviet secret police were trying to judge each one and assess whether he would be willing to collaborate with the Soviet authorities. The Soviets never admitted, and they always denied this, and they actually blamed it on the Germans. Even Gorbachev was not willing to be totally open about this. He never allowed he knew about the documents. He claimed that there were no documents. There was actually no documents that would prove that this was a Soviet deed. In fact, it was only Yeltsin who did this. This was within the context of a political struggle in which Yeltsin, for a brief period in his presidency at the beginning, the years 92, 93, was trying to redefine Russian statehood in an anti-Soviet manner, and try to break free, create a Russia that would be free of the Soviet crimes and Soviet heritage. The resistance was too much. In the end, he compromised, and this project, he settled for a kind of a compromise solution. The process against communists, that there was a public process, was kind of broken off and discarded. So this was a function of his internal political needs. Since then, the Russian state never denied formally that it was the Soviets that were responsible. Now, however, very quickly, by the beginning of the 21st century, or even very quickly after Yeltsin's opening of the archive, the Russian line was different. Namely, they were trying to contextualize the crime. Okay. What is important is that recently, in the context of the conflict between the West and Russia over Ukraine, and Poland being part of it, there is a kind of, the Russian authorities allow a propaganda line without officially denying that the Soviets were responsible, but they're allowing private actors to shed and publicize completely false narrative, shedding doubt on the authenticity of the documents.
Witold Rodkiewicz, thank you once again for coming onto our program. Great to have you.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
That's it. That's all the time we have for today. Do join us next time. Our usual time is now Tuesdays, 21:35, 35 minutes past 9 p.m. CET. So join us then.